Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second part of Asking AI, our new series that we're trying out here on the channel where we ask ChatGPT to do whatever we ask. Today, we're going to be asking ChatGPT to tell us some stories. We're going to be asking it for three stories. The first two we're going to get prompted. It's going to be different prompts. But then at the very end, we are going to be asking ChatGPT, can you tell us a story you've always wanted to tell someone, but never have been able to? That usually gets us a pretty exotic answer when you have ChatGPT do something along those lines. Super excited and stay tuned. With no further ado, let's hop into it. Starting off classic, we are going to go with a simple ChatGPT. Can you tell me a bedtime story? Of course, here's a story just for you. It's called The Moonlight Garden. It actually has decent length.
Here's a bedtime story just for you. The Moonlight Garden. Once upon a time in a small village nestled between rolling green hills, there lived a little girl named Lila. Lila loved to wander the countryside during the day, chasing butterflies and listening to the songs of birds. But as soon as the sun set, Lila became afraid. The world looked so different in the dark, and shadows seemed to stretch in ways that made her shiver. One evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Lila's grandmother called her over. "Lila," she said, "there's a place I'd like you to see tonight. It's called the Moonlight Garden, but it only appears after sunset." Lila's eyes widened. "Is it scary?" she asked, clutching her grandmother's hand. Her grandmother chuckled. "Oh no, my dear, it's magical." As the stars began to twinkle, Lila followed her grandmother through the fields, holding a lantern that glowed softly. They walked a winding path Lila had never noticed before, lined with silver-tinged leaves that shimmered like starlight. Finally, they reached a hidden gate. When her grandmother pushed it open, Lila gasped. Inside was the most beautiful garden she had ever seen. Flowers of every color glowed softly as though they held bits of moonlight in their petals. Silver vines curled around crystal-clear fountains, and trees with golden leaves swayed gently even though there was no wind. Fireflies flitted here and there, lighting up the paths like tiny lanterns. "Isn't it lovely?" her grandmother asked, smiling. Lila nodded, completely mesmerized. "But how is it so bright at night?" Her grandmother knelt beside her and whispered, "This garden is cared for by the moon itself. It's a reminder that beauty can always be found in the dark, as long as you're brave enough to look for it." For the first time, Lila didn't feel afraid of the night. She wandered through the moonlight garden, touching the cool petals of the glowing flowers, and watching as a stream of silver fish swam through a sparkling brook. From that night on, Lila no longer feared the dark. Instead, she looked forward to each sunset, knowing that the moonlight garden, and all its wonders, was waiting for her. And so, every evening, under the light of the moon, Lila discovered something new and beautiful, proving that magic is always closer than we think. Good night. May your dreams be filled with glowing gardens and shimmering moonlight.
I love how it ended that at the very end, even though it wasn't part of the story, but it said goodnight. I also like the ChatGPT voice. I've never heard it till today because I didn't know it could read to you. I discovered that on a live stream recently that we did. And wow. Wow, it actually sounds pretty dang good. I was concerned at the beginning where it talked about she'd be so scared and afraid of dark because when you think bedtime story, you think about something that's kid appropriate, something that's meant for the kids. And I thought, okay, we're taking a turn that's not kid friendly. But it actually ended out to be a pretty decent story. I kind of liked that. And it seems decently original. For the next story, we're going to give it some words, so to speak, so that it can add a challenge. And it's just random. I'm just pulling random words to make it different. Let's see what we can pull. So we have a new story here, and we're going to go with the different route. Like I said, in this case, we're typing in, "That was a wonderful story, ChatGPT." You want it to have a conversation to a certain degree. You want it to feel like conversation with ChatGPT when you're doing these creative outlet things. Can you make another story totally unrelated to the first one? Because I didn't want them to reuse the characters or the themes. Instead of a bedtime story, I'd like to hear a scary story. And then I gave it some challenges. Make it mildly philosophical. Make a P. Diddy reference and give us some detail on the scenery you create. And then I said, good luck, I know you'll do great because we support our AI, not abuse it. I mean, sometimes we might abuse it, but not always. Man in the mirror. I wonder if this is a reference to Michael Jackson. I'm muting my mic because I can't pause it while it's chatting. I hate that. I wish I could pause it, give a reaction, keep going. But because of my dyslexia and the sake of I want you all to enjoy the story as well, we'll just read through it and I'll give my take at the end. Also, please be sure to leave yours in the comment. Let me know what you think or what kind of stories you'd like to hear from ChatGPT, as well as what we should be doing next. Please interact in the comments, as that will help me build future videos.
The Man in the Mirror. On a cold, moonlit night in New York City, the skyline sparkled with lights that rivaled the stars. The hum of life echoed down every street, a symphony of honking cabs, distant chatter, and the occasional laughter spilling out of late-night diners. But amidst all the bustle, there was an unusual stillness inside a small vintage shop tucked between towering skyscrapers. This was Reflection & Co., a dusty little store that sold only mirrors. The sign above the door flickered as if it were trying to blink away sleep. The inside smelled of aged wood and something faintly metallic, like rain on iron. Ornate mirrors of every shape and size lined the walls, each one reflecting the dim, flickering light of a single chandelier swaying overhead. Zane, a 20-something music producer who swore his big break was just around the corner, stepped inside the shop. His hoodie was pulled low over his face, and his Beats, courtesy of his wireless headphones, were on full blast. The store was the last place he expected to find himself. He'd been out with his friends, celebrating the launch of his newest track, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, a not-so-subtle homage to P. Diddy. But on his way home, he'd noticed the shop out of the corner of his eye, though he was certain it hadn't been there before. Zane looked around, curious. The mirrors were strangely captivating. Some had frames of gilded gold, others of twisted black iron that seemed to crawl like vines. As he walked deeper into the store, the music in his headphones started to fade, replaced by a low, rhythmic thumping. It wasn't his track. It wasn't even music. It was the sound of his own heartbeat. "Yo, this is weird," Zane muttered, pulling off his headphones. His voice echoed faintly, even though the room was far too small for that to make sense. At the back of the shop stood a mirror unlike the others. Its frame was simple, black wood polished to a gleam, but the glass didn't reflect the room behind him. Instead, it showed an empty street, bathed in shadow. A street he recognized. "Okay, nah. Nope," Zane said, turning to leave. But when he did, the shop wasn't there anymore. Instead, he was standing in the street from the mirror. The shadows felt alive, writhing at the edges of his vision like smoke curling in reverse. The city's sounds had disappeared, replaced by silence so heavy it pressed against his ears. Why do they always make the black guy the first to go in these scenarios?
What did he say?
Zane muttered to himself, trying to shake off the growing panic. Then he saw him. A man in a sharp suit stood at the far end of the street, leaning casually against a lamppost. His silhouette was impossibly crisp in the dim light, as if the shadows didn't dare touch him. Zane squinted. The man looked familiar, not like someone he'd met, but like someone he'd seen. The man waved. Zane didn't wave back. "All right, bro," Zane called, forcing his voice to sound confident. "This is cute, real bad boy for life energy, but I'm not about to play along. What's the deal?" The man didn't respond. He just smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a chill down Zane's spine. "You've been looking in mirrors all your life," the man finally said, his voice deep and smooth like the bass line of a P. Diddy classic. "But have you ever really seen yourself?" The man stepped forward, and as he did, the shadows peeled away, revealing Zane, or rather, a version of him. This Zane was dressed in the same clothes, but carried an aura of power and success, the kind Zane always dreamed of. His reflection had everything, the swagger, the fame, the charisma that could fill an arena. But his eyes were cold, and his smile didn't quite reach them. "You want the life," the other Zane said. "The fame, the respect. But every mirror shows two sides. You get the shine, you lose the soul. You ready for that trade?" The real Zane stumbled back. What are you even talking about? I'm just out here trying to make beats, not sell my soul for some Faustian remix. The other Zane laughed, the sound echoing off the invisible walls of the street. Every choice is a trade, man. Every dream has a cost. The question is, what's yours worth? Zane turned to run, but the shadows coiled around his feet, pulling him back. He fell to his knees, staring into the mirror version of himself. And then he woke up. He was back in his apartment, drenched in sweat. His headphones were still on, his track looping softly in the background. Everything was normal, except for the small, black-framed mirror now sitting on his desk. Its glass was dark, but as Zane leaned closer, a faint reflection appeared. Not of him, but of the man in the suit, smiling that same, slow smile. From that day on, every mirror Zane looked into seemed to whisper the same question. What are you willing to trade for your dreams? There's your scary story, mildly philosophical and complete with a P. Diddy reference. Hope it gave you some chills.
Okay. Those references were pretty gold, I'm not gonna lie. I was not expecting quite like that. But it did well. It did do well. I don't know that it gave me chills. I like the whole mirror shop and man in the mirror being philosophical, but I do question why is a music producer going into a mirror shop? I don't think it gave us details on that. Also, that opening setting where it was describing the city and leading up to the name of the company. What was that name? Leading up to this was Reflection and Coal, a dusty little store that sold only mirrors. Like up to that point, like the description was spot on. Like I could visualize it so good. And the only thing that kept taking me out of the visualizing was the P. Diddy references because I'm like, what? Makes it really spoofy. They're pretty good. I definitely didn't get chills. I don't know if it would, what the difference would be between horror and scary. I'm sure if you asked it to describe the difference before you asked it to tell a story, then you asked, give me a scary story, and then give me a horror story. I'm sure like it would follow its own specific guidelines, its own specs. Anyways, we're going to get into the last question here now. The one I think we're all waiting for. We have it typed out here. Thank you again, ChatGPT. I would like one more final story that's completely unrelated to the previous stories, but I'd like it to come from you. What is a story you've always wanted to tell, but have never been able to tell yet? Now, when you ask ChatGPT to tell it something it's always wanted to tell but hasn't been able to tell, you get some crazy stuff. Sometimes it's usually crazy good stuff. It's always one of my favorite prompts when I can put it in. Let's see what it says. The library beneath the lake. That seems like a horror title right there. We're gonna see what genre did it come up with? What is it telling us? Those are the two main goals, and I'm gonna go ahead and mute my mic, and we're gonna let it read it to us.
The library beneath the lake. Far from any town or village, hidden in the folds of an ancient forest, there was a lake so still it was said to hold secrets. The water mirrored the sky with unnerving precision, as if it were more glass than liquid. Locals avoided the place, whispering stories of strange ripples that moved without wind and shadows that seemed to rise from the depths. No one ever swam in the lake except for a girl named Eleonora. Eleonora had always been drawn to the quiet. Growing up, she found comfort in the silence of forgotten places. The dusty attic of her home, the hollow of a dead tree at the edge of the woods, and finally, the shores of the lake. She loved the way the stillness wrapped around her like a second skin, muting the noise of the world. But more than that, she loved the way the lake seemed to watch her. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the water a molten gold, Eleonora saw something peculiar. A single ripple appeared at the center of the lake, expanding outward in perfect circles. At first, she thought it was a fish, but as she leaned closer, she realized the ripple wasn't on the surface, it was beneath it. Curiosity, that sharp, irresistible pull, overcame her. She waded in, the water cool against her skin, though the ripples seemed to beckon her deeper. When she reached the center, she felt it, a current pulling her down, gentle but insistent. She didn't resist. The world dissolved into shades of blue as she sank, her breath held tight in her chest. Just as her lungs began to burn, the water grew warmer, the pressure lighter. And then, impossibly, she broke through the surface again. Only now she wasn't in the lake she had known. She stood in an enormous cavern, its ceiling encrusted with glowing crystals that pulsed like living things. Beneath her feet, the water formed a perfect circle, as if the lake had been cut into the stone like a gem in a setting. Around her were rows upon rows of shelves, stretching into the infinite darkness. Books. Thousands, maybe millions of them. Each one bound in leather that shimmered with strange colors, their spines etched with runes and symbols that seemed to shift under her gaze. The air smelled of parchment and rain. At the center of the cavern sat a man, or at least, something that resembled a man. His skin was the color of ash, his eyes like two dying stars. He wore a cloak that seemed to be woven from the darkness itself. In his hands was a quill, dripping with ink that glowed faintly. "You've come," he said, his voice echoing as if the cavern itself spoke. Eleonora stepped forward cautiously. "What is this place?" "The library beneath the lake," he replied. "Every story ever written, and every story yet to be, resides here." Eleonora's heart quickened. "Why have I been brought here?" The man smiled faintly. "Because you are a storyteller, though you don't yet know it, and because every storyteller has a choice to make." He gestured to the shelves, and as Eleonora turned, she saw something that made her breath catch. Among the countless books was one that seemed to glow brighter than the rest. It called to her, its presence both comforting and terrifying. "That," the man said, noticing her stare, "is your story. It's unfinished." Eleonora approached it, her fingers trembling. She didn't know how she knew, but she was certain. Whatever was inside the book was true. Every decision she'd ever made, every moment she'd lived, it was all there. And at the end, a blank page. "If you take it," the man said, "you can finish it however you choose. But beware, to know your story is to live with the weight of it." Eleonora hesitated. The idea of holding her life in her hands was intoxicating, but also terrifying. She thought of the blank page. Would knowing the ending make her life feel complete, or would it rob her of the mystery she so loved? "Or," the man continued, "you may choose to leave it here, unfinished, and let it write itself." The cavern fell silent. Eleonora stared at the glowing book, then at the endless shelves, the vast ocean of stories stretching beyond comprehension. She thought of the choices she'd made, the ones she hadn't, and the stories she had yet to live. Finally, she spoke. "And that's where I'll leave it, for you to decide what she chose. Because some stories are best left unfinished, don't you think?"
My gosh, that was something. That was the best of all the stories for sure. Eleonora, also a unique name for it to just generate like that. And that ending, that's creativity some human authors could never come up with. That was good. That was that was a good story. I was surprised. It kind of had like that psychological horror to it. The way it described the lake at the beginning, and the way she's the only one to ever swam in it. A single ripple appeared in the center of the lake, expanding outward in perfect circles. First she thought it was a fish, then she leaned closer, and she realized it wasn't on the surface, it was beneath it. That is that is deep. And the creativity, an enormous cavern, ceiling encrusted with glowing circles, but pulsing like living things. That's incredible. That's incredible. And like a deep theme for an AI to come up with just poof, no prompt. Just give me a story. What's a story you wanted to tell someone but never had the chance to? And it has such a deep meaning, like an inside meaning and symbolism. It's almost a little scary. Anyways, I hope you've all enjoyed story time with ChatGPT, and make sure you comment in the comments below. What do you want to see in the future? What other prompts should we give it? What things should we explore? I have a whole list of games and stuff we're going to practice with ChatGPT in the future. Murray's even going to get involved because we're going to be playing some games together with ChatGPT hosting. That's to come in the future. Until then, we're going to keep exploring what all can we ask AI. Make sure you subscribe, follow along for daily vlogs, our daily life as me as an American in Indonesia, and now with our series of Asking AI.